Hi, thanks so much for tuning in. This video, we're going to describe how to set up an old iPhone with a new Apple ID for a bare bones phone for a user who's just starting out. So the first thing to do is select your language and your country. And now you have the option to set it up from a previous installation with apps and data, or to set it up manually. So we're going to choose set it up manually because we want this to be a fresh install. So choose your Wi-Fi network and enter in the password, and then you kind of just have to wait for Apple to do some initial setup and initialization on the phone. The next step is to agree to the data and privacy policy from Apple. Once you continue here, you'll see the next screen will be to set up Face ID. So I decided to set this up later because you're going to want to do this with your child. Now you need to create a passcode. This will be the passcode used to unlock the phone, install apps, and that sort of thing. So write it down, share it with your child. They're going to need it too. Here you're going to choose Don't Transfer Apps and Data because we're setting this up from scratch and we want to choose what's on there. And next, I'm going to go through the process to create a new Apple ID. And here it's asking you can enter in an existing Apple ID if you want, but I'm going to skip that and say create a new Apple ID. So in this page, you want to select Create a Free Apple ID. From here, you're going to have to enter in some information. So you got to put in the first name, last name, and date of birth. And you want to make sure the birth date is correct. And the steps we're going through are for a child under the age of 13. So that's what you're going to see here. It's different for somebody over the age of 13. Now, once the birth date is entered, you select Continue. And then you're going to have to enter in the information of an Apple ID for you as the parent. So make sure you enter your parent Apple ID and password here, and then click Next in the upper right-hand corner. You'll have to go through some verification steps on your own phone in order to complete this step. So have your phone handy. So make sure to check your device for the authentication code. So this will be sent to your iPhone or your MacBook that's signed in with your Apple ID. And then click the next link after you enter in that code. So now you're going to need to confirm that you're an adult by entering in the information from your credit card that's associated with your Apple ID. The CVV code is the 3-digit code on the back of your credit card associated with your Apple ID. So enter that code in here and click Next, and then you're going to have to agree again to the privacy policies for Apple and the terms and conditions. So go ahead and agree to these, and then you can proceed. And now you get to choose an Apple ID for your child. You can either use a default one that Apple creates for you, which is an iCloud account, or you can enter in an existing email address, which we're going to do for our purposes on this account. So we click Already Have an Existing Email Address and enter in an existing email address. And then we will have to confirm that email address by checking the inbox and getting the verification code that Apple sends there. So make sure to take a moment, check that email address, and now enter in the verification code here. This obviously takes a minute because you have to go check an email and come back. Now, once that code is entered, you'll need to create a password for this account. So this will be your child's Apple ID password. You'll want to write this down and save it, and then share that with your child. The next step is to enter a phone number. I just put in my existing phone number, so you should be able to just use your own phone number as a parent to associate with this account. So now we're getting into the good stuff. This is the parental controls. You want to make sure to turn on ScreenTime. So that's the first step in setting up parental controls. So press the button to turn on ScreenTime, and then you'll be carried to a set of settings that you can go through to customize what kind of parental controls you're going to have for your child. So now we get a look at what parental controls Apple offers for the apps that are built in to be included with the phone. And you get a variety of settings you can set for each of these. And we're going to go into detail about each of these later on and turn them all off. But for now, we're just going to show you what they are. After we finish this initial install of the phone, we'll go into the settings and turn most of these off. I just want to point out here that web content can be set to different things, and we'll go into the detail about how to limit your child's access to web content later on. There's also Siri, which we recommend turning off for a new user who's doing a bare bones setup. So turn on the restrictions here with this button. So after this, you'll get the opportunity to set what Apple calls downtime. Set time away from screens. So choose a window of time. It starts at 8 p.m. in this example, or 7 p.m., and stops at 8 a.m. And this is the time to which the child will not be able to access the majority of apps on the phone, and you can customize what they can access. You'll need to choose a ScreenTime passcode. So this is a code that you want to keep secret as the parent. So write this down somewhere where your child won't access. And now you can also turn on Ask to Buy. This is where your child can't make any purchases on the phone without first requesting from you and your Apple ID. So you want to turn this on. We continue here, and then you can choose some settings around location. This is really family specific, whether you want to be tracking your child's phone or not. So you can make this decision as a family. And then some other settings. Location services, again, this is sort of, do you want to allow location services or not from apps? iCloud Keychain, this is saving passwords locally on the phone. You might want to allow that to help your child remember things. You can set up Siri or not, and then get a weekly report of screen time. Okay, phone analytics, this sends it off to Apple. You can choose. And then just some appearance setting, how you want the display and the zoom to look. And that's the basics. Next, we're going to go into the details of what's on the phone and how the child can access it. Okay, since we finished the first part of setting up this phone, now we can move on to the next step. And we get better video because we finished setting up the phone. So the first thing to note is that there's way too many apps on the phone. We don't want our kid to be distracted by all of these things. So we're going to go in and set up the screen time settings and the parental controls so that your child has really just very minimal amount of things on this phone. So the first thing we need to do is to click into settings. So let's start there. And then you need to click on screen time to get to the settings. So let's click screen time. And now we're going to look at downtime first. We're just going to go down the list. So enter the screen time passcode that you wrote down during the setup process. And this is the one you want to make sure your child doesn't know. And now this is one of the first examples we're going to see of Apple parental controls just not working the way that you'd expect them to. Even though we set up downtime during the setup process, the downtime was not turned on and scheduled here as you would expect. So we have to go through that process again just to make sure that this is set correctly for your child. So the first thing you want to do is flip that scheduled switch so that it's turned on, select every day, and then choose a window of time when you don't want your child to have access to most of the features on the phone. The example shows 8 p.m. to 9 a.m. But you can choose something else, whatever works for your family. You know, for a first-time phone, we think they should be off of it by about 7 p.m. and probably not on it before school. So choose that. Make sure block it downtime is selected at the bottom of that page before you go back and move on to the next settings. It's important to note that if you don't have that block it downtime switch turned on, the child can very easily just continue to use their phone after the downtime settings. They can just say ignore downtime and continue using it. So make sure that is turned on. Moving on, we're going to look at app limits, and this limit determines how long your child can spend on defined apps. So you're going to say add limit, press add limit, and then select all apps and categories. This will ensure that there's a limit to kind of what rabbit holes your child can go down. So in our example, we're choosing 30 minutes, and we're going to make sure, again, block it end of limit is set, because otherwise they can just go around this setting very easily. And now you can see this is another one of Apple's flaws. The limit's not there after we set it. So we have to go out of screen time, come back in, and then flip this switch to turn app limits on. And now we see it there. We're going to go back up a level, and then we're going to check one more time, and you can see now it's actually set, and I believe it, so now we can move on. But this is a perfect example of an Apple flaw, which is you might think the setting is set, and as a parent, you sort of get comfortable with that, but you have to go in and check periodically because these settings get reset a lot, and you have to just be on top of it. Okay, so next is communication limits. Now, looking at the screen, you can choose who your child has access to communicate with during screen time, during downtime. And this Allow Contact Management feature allows the parent to manage contacts remotely. So I would turn that on as a parent who is interested in really being aware of what my child's doing on their phone. Lastly, you can choose Allow Contact Editing, and this is whether or not you allow your child to modify or remove, add existing contacts or new contacts on their phone. So these are all settings you can choose depending on how free you want your child to be with their contacts. For the purposes of this video, I'm setting kind of the maximum restrictions on things because this is a child's first phone. And you can always give more privileges as time passes, but it's a lot harder to take them away. So we start with a lot, and then we kind of what we call let the line out slowly as time goes, and they show that they are managing it responsibly. So now you want to go up a level again and choose communication safety. And here's a feature that Apple offers to check for sensitive photos. And what this does is basically it can, when a child sees a sensitive photo on their device, it will blur the photo and sort of give a warning over it. So I turn that feature on. I mean, hopefully that content's not getting through, but if it is, Apple has this feature to sort of protect the child. It's just another level of protection. Okay, so now up a level, and we're going to go into content and privacy restrictions, which is a really important part of this process. So first thing you need to do is make sure that switch is turned on at the top of the page to make sure content and privacy restrictions are active. Now, iTunes and App Store purchases are the first setting we're looking at. For installing apps, we're going to say don't allow. We don't need them installing any apps that we haven't looked at or approved. Deleting apps, we're going to allow because we're going to want to clean up some apps after we're done with this process. For in-app store purchases, you do not want to allow, so no purchases on the phone. It's just not necessary at this stage. And then always require password. It's just a good rule of thumb. Okay, so back up a level, we're going to look now at allowed apps, and you have to enter your passcode again. And here you'll see these are all available to your kid right now, but we want to turn them off. So we're going to turn off Safari, we're going to turn off SharePlay, we're going to turn off Wallet, AirDrop, and CarPlay so that we have FaceTime, camera, Siri, and dictation. Again, some people don't want that, and that's totally fine. Just turn it off if you don't want it. Okay, going up a level, now we're going to go into content restriction settings. Music, podcasts, whatever, clean. Music videos off. They don't need to watch music videos. This is a phone for phone purposes. Music profiles off. Movies don't allow. Again, we're expecting them to use this for calling and texting, communication. TV shows don't allow. Books clean. Apps set an appropriate age. App clips, I would say don't allow. This is little bits of functionality that you probably don't need for your kid. And now web content. We should talk a little bit about this. Here you can either allow your child to browse the internet unrestricted. You can choose to limit adult websites, which means that Apple kind of does an automatic filtering of sorts. Or you can only choose to allow them to look at the websites that you approve of. In our case, I would say limit adult websites, but we've turned off the browser, so they really don't have access to web content, hopefully. But if for some reason the browser through Apple's reset settings becomes available, we want to make sure this setting's turned on. Also, just good to know that this setting is here in case you need it in the future. Okay, going back again to the main screen. Next, we're going to look at explicit language, don't allow, and then go down the list of these gaming features. Multiplayer games, don't allow. Adding friends, don't allow. I mean, the phone's really setting up for communication, so we're going to turn all of these things. Connect with friends on the gaming center, we're turning it off. Screen recording, we're going to leave on because I need it on while I'm doing this demo. Private messaging, don't allow. Profile privacy changes, don't allow. We don't want them using the game center at all. Avatar nickname changes, don't allow. So we're just shutting all of that down. We don't want them using the game center. Moving on from content restrictions, we're going into the privacy restrictions. These restrictions are really about how the child can manage sharing this personal information with apps on the phone. So we're going to keep this restricted. What you want to do is set all of these to don't allow for now. As a first-time user on the phone, you really want to be gatekeeping a lot of this privacy information and making sure that the child can't just give access to the calendar to a new app or something like that. So we will turn off these privileges, and as the child shows more responsibility, you can go ahead and turn some of these back on if you feel comfortable, but you really want to be training the child how to use the phone. And part of that training process is talking to them about what the apps are trying to do and how to protect their data. And these settings are part of that process. Share my location, you don't want to allow them to change whether they can share their location or not. Similarly, with Bluetooth sharing, you just want to be careful how you give access to the device itself. And so each of these settings are going to be set to don't allow, which is really just meant to be the way to restrict the phone as much as possible and limit the functionality to the extent that it can really only be used for talking and for messaging. So communication only. Turning off speech recognition, turning off Apple advertising. You really have no harm in turning off advertising for the most part, as far as I can tell. Allow apps to request to track. We don't want to allow that. There's no reason an app should be tracking our child. Media and Apple Music, again, don't allow changes because it's just not necessary. And at the bottom, there's this whole section, allow changes. So you can turn off allow passcode changes. This way your child can't change the passcode to something that you don't know. Account changes, do not allow them to make changes to their account at this point in their Apple career. Cellular data changes, absolutely not. You don't want them to be making any of these changes, right? So reduce loud sounds is fine. We can turn that on. We want to be careful about ears. Driving focus, we can allow. Sure, there's no problem in that. TV provider, turn it off. There's no need for that. Background app activities, you can turn this off. Again, I think the app will request if it's needed, or you can keep it on if you feel comfortable with it. That's up to you. Going back up a level, now we're in the home stretch. We're going to look finally at always allowed. So these are the apps that are going to be always accessible to your child, even during downtime when other things are shut down. So phone, messages, FaceTime, and Maps is what we're showing here as an example of what you might allow your child to have always allowed. Other apps that are showing there, App Store and Camera and Photos, we are not going to allow those to be accessed during downtime. So now we've completed all of the basics of what we need to do in our settings. So next we are going to look at what's left on the phone. So there are a few things here that we don't need our kid to have access to, like Apple TV. So we're going to go ahead and long press on the Apple TV and then choose Remove App. And then you need to choose Delete App from this dialog box. After you do that, you'll see one more confirmation. Choose Delete, and this will remove Apple TV from the phone, and the kid can't reinstall it because we turned off installing apps in the settings. And so we're just going to repeat that process for a few other apps. The first is going to be music. So long hold, select Remove App, and then choose Delete App. And then from here, you choose Delete one more time. Once you've done this, it removes the music app from the phone. And we're going to repeat that for the Reminders app. You might choose to keep that on the phone, but I'm removing it just for simplicity. The Notes app. This is another place where you can either choose to keep it or remove it. It's just another distraction, so we're removing it. And now we're going to move into these widgets at the top where you see weather and calendar. We're going to remove this calendar widget, and this is just a display thing that we're removing. So if you long hold and choose Remove Widget and then Remove, it'll just remove that widget. This makes the screen just a little bit less enticing so that the kid's not drawn into their phone as much. And from here, you can then uninstall any other apps that you find unnecessary for your child. Some people might not want their photo and camera apps available, or weather or calendar. Those are all sort of personal preferences. As a parent, you can decide if your child's spending too much time to dial back some of these, if they're just fiddling with them too much, or you can keep them on if you find that your child finds them useful. That's up to you. So the last thing I want to show is if you swipe all the way left, you're going to see something called the App Library, and this shows all of the apps that are installed on the phone and that they have access to. So if you look here, you can see what's there, and at any point you can take your child's phone and take a look at what are all the apps on there so that you can be comforted that there's not something additional that you weren't aware of. And finally, I want to offer some tips. One, enlist your child to report when they have access to something that they don't usually have access to, and to let you know. This is about building trust between the two of you. Secondly, when things aren't working as expected, if your downtime's not working or screen time controls aren't working, what you should try doing is rebooting both the phone of your child and your own phone and see that usually that fixes the problem. And the third and final tip is just to set an alarm to remind yourself if you've disabled something temporarily to turn it back on before too long. That was a great tip that we got from one of our resident parents. And finally, I'll just say the most important thing that you can do as a parent is pay attention to what your children are doing on their phones and online. Talk to them, have the conversations, look at their phone with them, just talk to them about what they might be up to. That's the most important thing you can do as a parent. And that's the end of the demo here. If you have questions or comments, you can email us at info@screensense.org, or you can follow us also on Instagram and on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in.